It's time for Supply Chain Now Radio, broadcasting live from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia. Supply Chain Now Radio spotlights the best in all things supply chain. The people, the technologies, the best practices, and the critical issues of the day. And now, here are your hosts.
Hey, good morning. Scott Luton here with you live on Supply Chain Now Radio. Welcome back to the show. On this episode, we're going to be discussing some of the new technologies that are bridging the gap between buyers and suppliers, especially from a manufacturing standpoint. On a quick programming note, like all of our series on Supply Chain Now Radio, you can find our replays on a variety of channels: Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, YouTube, wherever else you get your podcasts from. As always, we would love to have you subscribe so you don't miss anything. And before we get started here, let's thank all of our sponsors that allow us to bring these best practices and innovative ideas to you, our audience, from APICS Atlanta, The Effective Syndicate, ProPurchaser.com, TalentStream, many more. You can check out each of our sponsors on the show notes of this episode. Okay, so let's say hello to my esteemed co-hosts here today. First up, we have Chris Barnes, APICS coach and the executive director of APICS Atlanta. Chris, how you doing?
Hello, Scott. Good to be here.
Good to have you back with us. You've been everywhere here lately.
There's a lot going on.
There is a lot going on.
Supply chain is hot.
Supply chain is hot.
It's good.
As we always say, it is a wonderful time to be working in the world of global supply chain these days, right? And also, Will Haraway, founder and chief evangelist at Backbeat Marketing. Will, how you doing?
I'm great, man.
And you just got back from Chicago, which we're going to dive more into here momentarily.
I was up there at FreightWaves Live. They do 2 a year, and that actually back in Atlanta in May. So, yeah, it was a wonderful show. It's a lot of energy there. Like you were just saying, it's a great time to be in logistics and supply chain for sure. It's just getting bigger and better.
Absolutely. And, Will, you also serve as a co-host on our Supply Chain City series. We got a big show around the corner.
Yeah.
With the folks who are over at Stored, which have been growing left and right too.
We hadn't talked to them in a bit, so it'll be nice to see where they've been, and I think we probably talked to them 12 months ago, so it'll be great to see what's happened for them in that 12 months. Yeah, they have had a lot of stuff going on from really every aspect, so looking forward to that.
Absolutely. So before we tackle some more of the notes from around industry, we want to welcome in our featured guest here today, Mr. Bo Hagler, CEO at LiveSource. How you doing, Bo?
Good. Thank you for having me.
You bet. I really enjoyed some of the prep we're doing, some of the prep conversations we've been having. You've been leading, I think, a fascinating organization that's doing some really unique things, especially from a buyer-supplier standpoint, kind of like we alluded to earlier. But looking forward to picking your brain on a wide variety of things here shortly.
Great.
Okay, so before we dive into the interview with Bo, we've got some news and notes from the news desk, stuff taking place from across the end-to-end global supply chain. So, Will, I know you've got some things from your recent travels. Lay it on us.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was at FreightWaves this week where it was 0 degrees in Chicago. They were upset about it. They said that was too early for that type of weather. I have no idea. Every time I'm there beyond September-ish, it seems to be about the same, so what do I know? But yeah, they seemed a little taken aback by it. They were like, no, it's too early for this. Kind of like we say with the heat, probably.
Right, I'm sure.
When it starts showing up in May.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was great. I'm a big fan of those shows. I went to the one in Atlanta, too. And they do a great job with their production and the way that they have the demo. They have the demo days where everybody gets 7 minutes. The startups, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a startup. Like JB Hunt put out their their latest tech platform via one of the 7-minute demos, and they do, like, over the course of 2 days, they literally do like 60 or 70 of them because they're only 7 minutes. But those are great to watch. And then after,
what can you get done in 7 minutes?
Well, actually, I think it's the perfect time because you've got to really drill down into your pitch, and what's funny is that it is derivatives of kind of the same stuff. Like there's a lot of digital freight marketplaces out there, and I know because Backbeat has 2 or 3 of our own that are clients. I totally get it. There's a cross-border one, there's an ELD one, et cetera, et cetera. But so you sort of watch, and you're like, oh, I see what they're doing. And then they show their platform, and either it shows well or it doesn't, and either they tell the story well or it doesn't. So what I've been telling folks that want to get into it, it's like, well, if you can tell the story well, then you're actually going to get a really nice boost because so many people don't.
Yes.
You know,
I will
honestly.
never get an invite to a 7-minute speech.
No, it's not true. Yeah, so you are, no.
We can't say our first name in 7 minutes, I don't think.
That's right. No,
nevertheless.
no Braves talk. But that was great. A lot of energy because of that. And one of the things that there's a lot of talk about was, again, integrating hours of service for trucking because the ELD deadline, again, this is the third straight year we've had a deadline in December, and it's December 16th, so just a month from today is the day that the AOBRD tech is now is now grandfathered out. You can no longer use it. You have to have telematics. They gave them a year last year and by all rights, it's at about 30% adoption amongst carriers. So, and the only thing that's really going to stop or make people adopt it is when they start getting pulled over and taken out of service. And that's, I think, what you're going to start seeing in December, maybe for the first time. But we'll see. It's 3 years, and they haven't said that. And interestingly enough, one of the things that happened last week that even spurred this on was one of the big ELD providers, Omnitrax, had a huge outage. And like a half of their customer base of truckers they weren't getting their hours of service data uploaded. So they were non-compliant. Basically, the whole reason why they have why this exists is so that you'll be compliant with the Federal Motor Carrier Association. So that was a whole issue, and it's brought up this about the technology basically within the cab. Like, what do you do when you're in a remote location?
Right.
And some providers, and this is the time now because people are going to start making this decision on December 1st because these guys have certainly procrastinated this long. Why not procrastinate another couple of weeks? But, so they're going to be looking at the tech and hopefully finding the tech that is that updates the data and the hours of service and the routes within the cab, and they call this edge computing is what they call it, edge computing within the cab. And then when you have connectivity, it uploads that to your administrator, and everybody gets that. So it's not like if you think of it like streaming. If you're out of mobile range,
which is going to happen, right? At least for the foreseeable future.
So some of the tech relies on that. So if you're out of mobile range, it's not updating.
Well, I can tell you, we drove the Supply Chain Now Radio transit van to Austin, Texas, in the last week or two, and you'd be surprised how many pockets where you don't have that coverage. So
that's right.
So there's going to have to be some stopgap until there is more. And we've touched on this before, Will. What's underreported oftentimes is rural inaccessibility to Wi-Fi and the internet and all kinds of devices. So naturally, it's going to impact the transportation markets. We'll see how this stuff takes root, huh?
Well, and again, it's the guys who were forward thinking about it, that are going to, you would think, rule the day when here in a couple of weeks when so many of these, millions of drivers are going to have to make this update. So what are they going to choose? They're going to choose the things that are
pay the bills, right?
Yeah,
the priority items first
and work the best,
right? That's right.
So.
Okay, so I know that. So I'm sure that was a lot of the talk up at FreightWaves. Yeah. Anything else that really struck your fancy in Chicago?
Well, while we were there, I'm sure this was by design, but Convoy announced a $40 million raise, so just so they could dominate the, dominate the headlines.
The FreightWaves.
Yeah, and they announced their top 25, the FreightWaves top 25. They call it the Freight Tech 25. Amazon was the leader of that again. Project 44 behind it, and then Convoy up at number 3. But, it's a lot of the companies that you see and expect. Flexport is in there. FourKites is in there. C.H. Robinson is in there. Uber Freight, certainly. LoadSmart, Schneider. ship well, and on and on and on. But
you remember we had Kristen Ferecki on,
of course,
Convoy back over the summer, and it was my first opportunity. You might have already had some to sit down with a member of their leadership team and really understand the story firsthand. Remarkable. We talked about their incredible culture, practical, meaningful culture, not lip service of continuous improvement. Where they were already disrupting the transportation market in a way that a non-cliche way, right? Our friend Greg White hates the inaccurate usage of the term disruptive. So, Greg, if you're listening. But, man, what an incredible story. So no wonder they continue investment.
$40 million would indicate that message is
alive and
continues to resonate with all the tech that they're doing and the drop and hook, with the trailers that Kristen told us about while she was here.
We're going to sign up. We got a van now. We got to sell that space. I was kicking myself before we went.
You could have easily backhauled some goods back from Austin, made a couple bucks.
I know. Plus, I'd like to see it firsthand just so I know about the process.
Think about the mixer we could have gotten with that money.
That's right. All right. Anything else on the front end from the news desk?
It was a great show. And again, FreightWaves Live will be in Atlanta in May. And I feel sure that we will do everything we can to broadcast from there. And we'll see how that goes. But I'm definitely attending it. And, We'll keep reporting on that.
Fantastic. Well, great to have you back. Looking forward to we got some really neat episodes that we talked about, the Supply Chain City series here on Supply Chain Radio. Looking forward to that as well. But we got a great interview here. And before we dive into Bo Hagler's story, a CEO at LiveSource, Chris, the APICS Atlanta chapter continues to grow and expand its education offerings. I think in the last few weeks you were at one of the iconic Atlanta companies talking about supply chain. And classes have continued at Georgia Tech. I think you've been across the state helping folks get better at managing their supply chains, right?
Sure. Well, what I'm more excited about is the future of supply chain. We're seeing a lot of universities signing up new student chapters. That's the future of, for all of us. It's the career plan. So not only, the larger, the classical schools, Georgia Tech, those types of organizations, but we're seeing new things. Just last night I was at Georgia Gwinnett College. That's our newest student chapter. They've got a great program out there, great campus, great facility.
APICS Student Chapter for our audience,
APICS,
right? Yeah.
APICS, yes, sir. So APICS Student Chapter, so we're supporting them as best we can. They have about 50 people in the new program, and we're heading out to West Georgia College as well. So that's going to be our next chapter, APICS Student Chapter. We sign up.
Outstanding. And that is, we've talked about this a lot. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse sometimes, but, it's that awareness. We all don't know what we don't know. I graduated college without ever, sitting down with a manufacturer or taking a plant tour or ever understanding what goes on across the global end-to-end supply chain space. And so naturally, if you don't know about it, it's not going to be a career opportunity, right? For most people, for most humans. So I'd love to see what APICS Atlanta is driving and the board's driving, because that getting these folks, which is free. And by the way, for any students listening, it's free to become an APICS student member and associate with these student chapters. And it really provides an outstanding professional development and learning opportunity, right?
It does, yes. The key thing is it's free. Obviously, you have to have somewhat of an interest in it. You don't want to just sign up to get stuff, but that's the key thing, is the free factor.
Well, as we tell people that listen to our podcast, if they don't like what they listen, it's a money-back guarantee.
Sure. That's
same experience with student chapters, right?
But that's exciting to see. Well, just the level of interest. I think it's all driven by career, job opportunities, obviously.
Right. As
the professors are starting to see that more as a space for the students to get jobs.
Yep.
They want to start promoting it and pushing their students in that, encouraging their students in that direction.
Outstanding. Well, appreciate the good work. APICS Atlanta and the chapters driving. And gosh, we're approaching a 60th anniversary with APICS Atlanta right around the corner these days.
Right around the corner.
Okay, so to our audience, we've got a supply chain leader sitting with us here today that we're going to dive into. LiveSource has been doing some really neat things, and we're going to learn more together here over the next few minutes. So I want to welcome back in Bo Hagler, CEO at LiveSource. Good morning again, Bo.
Good. Thank you for having me.
So before we kind of talk shop and get your insights on what's going on across the world of supply chain, let's get to know you better. So tell us, where'd you grow up?
Grew up in Augusta, Georgia.
Okay. All right.
Not too far from here.
The CSRA.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
Most people may not know what the acronym stands for, but Central Savannah River Area. So I was born and raised in Aiken County.
Okay.
Across the Savannah River.
Right.
We went to Augusta all the time, Augusta Mall and Regency Mall, which the latter is, I think, still sitting there. That's where we did. That was a big city for us, where we did our Christmas shopping and whatnot.
Right. And most people know Augusta because of the Masters.
Yes.
Which is where all the people in Augusta leave during the Masters.
Is that right?
Rent their houses out.
That's where they make their money.
Exactly. Yeah.
Make that Christmas money.
Wow.
So tell us a little bit, give us a Reader's Digest version from growing up in Augusta until, serving as CEO of LiveSource. Tell us a little bit about the journey in between.
So I graduated from Georgia Tech here back in 1988. And started my first software company right out of school. Don't recommend that your kids don't do that. But it was an application for enterprise asset management, basically not supply chain, but inside the four walls of a plant, maintaining equipment. And we had that company for about 17 years. We integrated in with ERP systems back in the 90s and had customers in 17 countries and 8 or 10 languages. And then sold the company in 2006 to an ERP provider called QAD out of Santa Barbara, California, with offices in about 22 countries. I was with QAD for 7 years in a number of leadership roles. I ran their strategic product units. Basically, they had acquired a bunch of companies like ours, and I ran that group of products. Was responsible for sales operations for a while and ended up as VP of R&D my last couple of years. And I had one of the investors and the board members of a company called MFG.com, which is the world's largest manufacturing marketplace here in Atlanta, asked me if I wanted to come try my hands at that company. And when I came in, they had this product they had acquired from Switzerland called Sourcing Parts that they had renamed LiveSource. And became clear to me that was where there was really an interesting opportunity. And so we took that product, which started off as a supplier management and strategic sourcing system focused on direct materials, and built it out to cover basically all of the other supply chain processes related to upstream supply chain. And we spun it out as a standalone business in '88. We closed on a Series A financing and been off to the races since about September last year.
Outstanding. Wow.
Yeah.
So quick question. So going back a couple of stops, leading R&D in a technology space, and of course also being an entrepreneur, coming out of school for 17 years. Wow. What do you think, and whichever direction you want to take, what do you think is most overlooked about what makes true successful research and development innovation efforts in the technology space, or what's one of the things that folks get wrong all the time? What, from your experience, anything come to mind?
Well, I mean, in a startup environment, the most difficult thing is if you don't have a background in working for an organization that has a kind of a rigorous process and for developing software, you can end up making a lot of mistakes from a technology standpoint. But really, where the biggest potential errors come from is really on the product management side, not going out and speaking to customers and building products that the market wants and trying to sit inside your office and build things that you think people want, which you're almost always incorrect. There was a saying. When we're sitting around a table, that since none of us are buying the software, none of us really get a vote. So we always have to go outside. So if I was talking to an entrepreneur, I'd say, drive your product innovation and your product designs based on what the market wants, not what you think they want.
Love that. Absolutely. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about LiveSource. You kind of alluded to what the organization does here a few seconds ago, but tell us more. What kind of problems is the organization solving?
Right. So we're upstream supply chain. So a lot of when people think about supply chains, you think about downstream, you think about logistics. So we are prior to that. So it's easier to give an example from maybe a customer perspective. So we have one of our customers is Dana. They make drivetrains and axles. They have about 140 plants around the world in 30 countries or so. And they have close to 80% of their manufacturing of their parts are taking place in their 3,500 suppliers around the world. So when you think about a company like that, and the partnership that they have to have with those direct material suppliers, it's daunting. You know, it comes in the form of when new programs come in. New program in the automotive industry is like a new project, a new product. They've got to go through initial costing estimations, then they've got to bring their suppliers into that quoting process and get and solidify on pricing. And then when they get awarded the business, they have to launch a process. They go through quality, such as APQPs and PPAP processes for production part approval process, because you can't just start making it. You've got to design the part, you've got to build the tooling, you've got to test the part, it's got to be certified all the way up the line. So when you start actually making parts, it all flows back to the customer's plant, and it meets specifications. And in the automotive industry, everything is just in time. So there's no slack. Everything has got to be perfect. So when you
lots of pressure in that industry,
a tremendous amount of pressure, and they're always trying to squeeze cost out. So there's not a lot of fat in there, and so any mistakes, any disruptions in that supply chain go straight to the bottom line. So another is in talking to customers, and I spend most of my time out talking to existing customers or talking to sales prospects. We kind of went in and talked about the complexity of the upstream supply chain, and it's almost like a spaghetti chart. You see all the interactions. Most of these interactions are happening with spreadsheets. Everybody has ERPs, they have quality management systems, but everything that I've just talked about is done on spreadsheets and emails, no matter how big the company is, whether it's the OEMs are doing it the same way.
So you're saying spreadsheets are big in supply chain?
They are big in supply chain.
It's the biggest, it's still the most popular planning tool that I know of.
What's that, Excel?
Microsoft Excel. Yeah.
Right. And the advanced companies actually have it stored on SharePoint drives, and the ones that are not very disciplined are sitting on the employees' drives.
That's a good point.
Right. And so how do you aggregate that? So if you take, for example, once a program launches, and now they have 1 to 2 years before they actually start production, the bill of material associated to that item is going to change between 40 and 50,000 times. All of those times can impact the pricing of it. So talking about your cost creep, if you don't manage that, if you don't say, who's responsible for that? Is it, the customer drove that change. They need to pay for that. Well, if you're not able to document it, if you can't pull it off the spreadsheets, you're going to eat the cost.
One of the other unique aspects of the automotive industry is beyond the pressure and beyond the price controls. The products have to be rigorous, from a safety standpoint, because people can die. It's not cliche, right? It's very similar to the aerospace industry. There's some critical components that beyond controlling the cost and making sure all those changes that you alluded to, come off. I mean, the quality has got to be job one still, to borrow the phrase from what Ford had that in the 80s, I think, or something.
Right.
Well, you're looking at me. Is that right?
No,
sound about right?
I think that's right. I got to think back.
Well, and we also do business in the aerospace defense. So you think safety is not a concern there? Medical devices is another. I mean, because they all have the same kind of issue. They're a supply chain. They're making engineered parts from blueprints and shipping it back. So to me, I don't see how VPs of supply chain sleep at night. Where are my parts? Are they going to come in on time? Are they going to make the right specifications? Are they going to kill somebody down the road?
Gosh. Now, one of the things that you mentioned earlier, you love to get out and talk with the customers. So our next question I was going to ask you about where, every CEO kind of takes he or her takes a different approach. He or she takes a different approach to where they spend their time. Clearly, talking with customers is one of the places you like to spend your time. Where else?
Well, I take that information from the field and then bring it back to product management. I think, we're a young company. We're growing. We're innovating. And so, I feel like one of the things that I can do is have firsthand knowledge of what's happening. And so with my background in R&D and product management, I have an affinity for that. So I spend most of my time out in the field and then working back with our development teams and, making sure that we're building stuff that's going to meet, the customer's expectations.
Rather than just building stuff that we like and we think are neat.
Right.
Going back to what you said earlier, there's got to be demand for it in the market. Otherwise, we're just wasting a whole bunch of time and resources.
That's called shelfware. Yeah. We've all been guilty of building shelfware at some point in our life.
Besides that, you want it to be applicable to what's going on in the field. Stuff changes all the time,
right?
Especially with the advances in technology. You don't know what people are doing, you know, versus on different platforms. So to be able to hear that firsthand and then give it right back to your product managers, that's what everybody needs to be doing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And you know you've done it right when you can go to 5 other customers afterwards and you see everybody has the same problem.
Exactly.
And you built something, and that's the key.
It's usually a universal issue.
Right.
At least for the 90 days, and then changes.
Right. Yeah. It's always evolving.
Right.
So you're already, it's like you got a crystal ball of the questions I'm going to ask you. Let's talk, you've already spoken to some of the current challenges that are facing suppliers, but what else is out there? What else are keeping that proverbial VP of supply chain up at night or keeping suppliers up at night?
Well, I mean, it all stems from a lack of data. You know, so I was meeting with a senior executive of a large manufacturing company that controlled a $13 billion supply chain budget. And when we kind of went through and we showed him 2 slides in our first meeting, one was kind of the chaos, and he goes, that's my world, you know, and then we kind of showed, you know, could you put a system in place to kind of streamline all these processes and standardize all this data? And he goes, that's what I've been trying to do. And from there, he kind of went on to a story of trying to talk about how he looked at the problem. So he cited a KPI, on-time deliveries, and he's target on-time delivery of 95%, currently at 87%. The delta between those two is costing him $1.8 billion a year. But what was interesting to me is when he started kind of peeling that back and trying to say, well, what caused that? Well, one of the big categories was expedited cost. And you go, okay, well, that's a cost, freight cost, shipping stuff in. But really, when you peel that back further, what you realized is that it really stemmed from miscommunication within the supply chain during the launch process. So a supplier, I'm going to make it up in North America, had not received one of those 40,000 BOM changes and built a $500,000 tool against the wrong version of the BOM. Nobody knew it until parts were received at their location. And now all of a sudden they realize we're in a just-in-time environment. We have a tool that's going to take 4 months to rebuild it. So what do? They start expediting parts over from Europe, which there you get your extra cost. And then they put that supplier over capacity. And so now they're short deliveries of their customers in Europe. 4 months later, when they go back online in the U.S. with the new tool, they forget to tell them to adjust their volumes for the year, and they end up with 4 months of excess inventory at the end of the year that they can't sell. You know, so it all stems from this miscommunication, and it really comes down to the data. And what he said is, you know, we have teams of people that are looking into our 200 ERP systems and trying to figure out where we are with our supplier. And we actually have artificial intelligence. We've applied to this data to look for patterns between the ERPs. But at the end of the day, it takes us 90 days to collect a report, and it's only 22% accurate. What can you do with that? And what it really came down to is we really kind of looked at it is the vast majority, 70% of the data that he was trying to manage is in spreadsheets. And how can you manage those processes and try to do analytics against hundreds of thousands of spreadsheets? It can't be done. So to me, it sounds, here it is, 2019, and we're still talking about, companies still lacking the ability to bring standardized data in. So, digitizing the supply chain, it's not real sexy, but it's the building block that everything else leads on. And with that data, then you can get into some really interesting conversations around analytics, machine learning, IoT devices, and things like that.
Huge force multiplier. So you were speaking about some of the ways that data is helping to alleviate some of those challenges you mentioned. Talk to us more about the impact of data in end-to-end global supply chain.
Well, as I was saying in the example, without having that data, you don't even know that you're in trouble, and so in talking to other VPs of supply chains with customers, what they've told us is that we have teams of people that their job is to be deployed out into the field around the world to go help distressed suppliers. And it's a partnership, right? So it's not an adversarial, but we need to know when suppliers are struggling. And in many cases, we don't know that they're struggling because we lack the data to tell us that. There's no leading indicator because, again, it's in spreadsheets. And so when the crisis occurs, they deploy the teams, but at that point, the damage has been done. So now we're in firefighting mode. So with data there, at the ready, you begin to see leading indicators or trends that would indicate that there's something going on. We had a VP of supply chain that relayed a story where they had a good supplier in Mexico that had always delivered And then all of a sudden they started shorting their deliveries a little bit, and over a month's period of time it became a crisis. And what had happened is it had been an earthquake a couple years ago, and they had one of their presses had been damaged, and they didn't want to share it. The machine was down because they were scared that the customer was going to come take the tool and take it somewhere else. And it's like, if we had had some sort of indication, at the plant, and this is where maybe IoT comes into play, we would have actually seen that coming and could have avoided, the firefighting we had to go through.
So the ability to get out in front, to proactively lead when it comes down to it, rather than leading the reaction, the firefighting, the deploying teams to try to put the genie back in the bottle.
Yeah, so, for simple data. So data coming back in, it says, this was the ASN I got back in, and I actually only received 85% of that. So that becomes a trend. Or you start comparing that with the number of non-conformancy defects being reported against it and the severity of them. So you start comparing those two metrics, and all of a sudden you can see where there's a potential issue. And again, when you're dealing with, 3,500 or 5,000 suppliers, around the globe, it's hard for the human to actually be on top of all that data all the time. And so that's where technology can come in and really help you get ahead of that.
So, Bo, I've got my APICS hat on here, and I'm trying to figure out what you guys really are. I mean, where you're playing, which space. Sounds a little bit like supplier relationship management. Is that?
I think that's an accurate depiction. We are our description of our product. We're a supplier relationship management that focuses on all the data in the business and processes associated to direct material suppliers. We started off as a strategic sourcing system, but most systems in that space focus on the indirect. So they're buying off of standard parts off a catalog, and it's about large volume, high volume, low dollar items. So it's really about efficiency. But in the direct material side, it's a lot more than just price, as we've been saying. So we're trying to bring all of that data and all those processes together in one place.
And I heard you speak at other venues. You talk about a single source of truth. Is that one of the value drivers?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's where all customers start with. The example I gave earlier, that's utopia for them, is to get that single source of the truth. We go back to the customers that we come in, because most of them have grown through acquisition. So it's not unusual for us to go into any company and to see that they have 5, 10, 20, 100 different ERP systems, because they've grown up over time. And so even when coming to a standard supplier master, they have the same supplier has different supplier numbers depending on the system that they're in. So when they sit down for sourcing events, when they're ready to award new business, many times in these sourcing councils, they can't even agree what supplier they're talking about. And so what they say is that we end up not making decisions because we're arguing about who we're discussing. So when you're trying to rationalize your supply base and you're trying to get efficiencies, if you don't have everybody on the same page, you may have a supplier that's been blacklisted in one region, but the other region is still continuing to award them business because there's no way to even communicate that that's happening.
So the companies such as Dana, they would be your custower, correct? They would be the one that buys it?
Could be an OEM, and using a tool like ours to manage their tier ones. We have, I would say in the automotive space, we have most of our traction is with the tier ones managing their tier twos.
So I'm thinking about this from a business side, is there any way that the suppliers could benefit from using the system as well?
Well, they have to.
As opposed to being forced, say, hey, you have to use this.
Yeah, and that was a model that was tried, maybe 15 years ago or so, where they tried to force it in and charge the suppliers. We personally look at the suppliers as an extension of our customer. We have 35,000 active users in our network today. 85% of those are suppliers, which means that they're doing most of the data input, which is good for our customers, because in the past they were emailing out spreadsheets and then hammering it back in or typing it back into something else. So now the suppliers are feeding you standardized data. So we need to treat them, with the respect that they deserve and make their job very easy. So the first thing that we try to do is just make it easier than what they were doing in the past. But secondly is to then provide them value and maybe some analytics back on the data that they're providing that can help improve their business. And so the focus has got to be on the supplier and what's in it for them.
You mentioned a couple of times tooling. So that's a pretty big asset in terms of automotive supply chain, I think, or?
Yeah, it's been surprising when we go into you take a company, a tier one supplier that's $3 billion in revenue. It's not going to be unusual to see that they're manufacturing $600 million a year in new tooling. And that tooling is spread out across 1,000 plus suppliers. And that tool has to stay in service for 15 to 30 years to make spare parts. So knowing where that tool is at and then knowing its condition, is key.
Yes. Well, on that note, as someone that's been in the metal stamping industry, you'd be surprised how tough it can be to manage tools and tooling, and especially across, a global footprint like you're talking about when you've got hundreds, if not thousands of plants and facilities. That's a big challenge. We've seen a lot more of the RFID tags being put on tools to help address, because when you've got to make the parts or spare parts, it's kind of tough to do without the tool.
When they go through and they get an audit, I mean, we've had customers that were budgeting tens of millions of dollars a year to have to replace lost tools.
Yeah.
And that's an embarrassing
lost
situation.
tools. You mean lost at the supplier?
Lost at the supplier.
So they ship it to the supplier to use it,
and don't know where it is. We had a customer that relayed a story one time where they had a supplier that had gone out of business. And they really weren't using the supplier as much as they had in the past, so they didn't focus on it. And about a year later, when they were doing an audit on their tools, they realized that, the supplier had one of these tools or had several of them. And when they talked to the receiver, they'd already sold the tool.
Gosh.
And it showed up on the market 2 years later in China making counterfeit parts using substandard metal.
Wow.
So an embarrassing situation. So not only is it just lost money, but it can certainly cause downstream problems if you don't manage those assets.
So let's take a left-hand turn back onto the technology side, and you've alluded to a couple of them that we're seeing very prevalent out in the industry. IoT clearly is one that's revolutionizing, and we're just scratching the surface in what truly can take place with IoT, especially and everyone's got kind of a different take on 5G, but a lot of the folks we're talking to and a lot of the research we're reading, it's going to revolutionize and really enable these technologies like IoT to do some really, really neat game-changing things. What other emerging technologies have you been tracking, especially from the manufacturing supply chain space?
Well, I think IoT is a really interesting play in our world, and specifically on the tooling. So we just talked, you've got, hundreds of millions of dollars in tools and assets going out in the field. So putting IoT devices on them is good because you can track where they are. You want to know when they left the plant because you're not allowed to move a tool and just outsource it to another plant. You would have to go through a new production part approval process before you could do that. But putting IoT sensors on toolings has another benefit. We actually piloted it with a couple of our customers last year by putting these devices on the tools in their supplier plants and running it. And what it does is it actually sends back data to tell them when the tool ran, how long it ran, how many cycles it ran. And so now all of a sudden, if you can compare the amount of cycles against the actual products being produced, you can start seeing, do we have a scrap problem? We know that scrap should be 5% or whatever, but this tool ran enough last month to ship us 10,000 parts, but they only seem to produce 5,000. What's the delta? Were they using this tool? Was the supplier using the tool for somebody else's parts? Is there excess scrap, which may indicate that they've had a change of ownership in the plant, and maybe they have people that are running the tool that don't know how to use it anymore. Again, leading indicators. So now that leads you into capacity. So that's a big question in a lot of the industries that we sell to, is they're constantly being given scenarios. What happens if the OEMs increase their orders by 20%? Where do I have a capacity problem? And the only thing that the manufacturers can rely on is what the contracted capacity was that was established at the time the contract was written. But by being able to put IoT devices on the tools in the plant, you can actually see demonstrated capacity. And so when you see changes in demand, now you can see where you really have bottlenecks. Where beforehand, and again, suppliers in many cases are going to be they're going to be the last people to tell you they have a capacity problem because they want to try to make it work.
Right. They want to keep the business and get more business.
Absolutely. But the owner of that tool deserves the right to know if they're not going to be able to deliver to their customer too. So it's it has to be a partnership, and using devices like that really provides the manufacturer with a visibility they've never had before.
So let's look at it on the flip side. Some of the concerns, sensitivities that you've seen maybe some organizations have that keep them from fully implementing some of the latest and greatest technology. What are you seeing there?
Well, some of it is just, it's still new. So we have not found a lot of IoT devices that can do this. We're starting to see them. The company, we're not manufacturers of IoT devices. We don't want to be in the hardware business. We're basically in the software and analytics. We came across a company that was spawned out of South Korea that built this tool in conjunction with Samsung, who had 40,000 tools in Asia that they were trying to do exactly this, and now they've spawned a new company. So some of it is just getting the word out, getting the technology. When you start talking about putting IoT devices on tooling, there's a lot of different kind of manufacturing processes. There's stamping and there's injection molding, and some of these environments are pretty harsh. They're 400 degrees. They're wet, and just, putting technology on them. And so as the technology continues to evolve, I think it will become cleaner, more prevalent. I would say the other thing is you do get into a contractual issue, because you're putting devices and you've got visibility. And so it has to be built into the contracts with the suppliers to get their go-ahead. But again, how this can benefit the suppliers is you can now start giving preventative maintenance type of feedback on how that tool is running, and is it making the parts right? Is it time to be tuned up? So if you can, again, I think IoT devices is a play that can provide a real value add to the suppliers too. So it's a win-win relationship.
Huge. So let's break out your crystal ball one more time. Let's talk about the future of supplier management. What else do you, if you're making some bold, fearless predictions, and don't feel compelled to, but what does the future look like?
Well, I think it's along the lines of what we said. I mean, the future still starts with doing the basics, just like we were talking about. If you're going to design software products, you need to go out to the field and get firsthand information. They've got to, manufacturers have got to first of all figure out how to standardize and digitize this vast amounts of data that is currently sitting in spreadsheets. That starts. So you can talk about all the technology you want, but if you don't have that as a starting place, then you've got nowhere to go. But once that's in place, then looking at technologies like IoT and analytics. So we've adopted it's called a data lake. It's basically a generation after the the OLAP systems, and those technologies are really cool. I mean, we have in our database over 10 billion quotes in our system, supplier quotes, 10 billion. And we can, with a B, because the product has been around for 20 years. So there's lots of history in the system. And we can interrogate that data in fractions of a second with the new technology. This technology typically comes with machine learning algorithms. So now all of a sudden you can go from looking in the rearview mirror, looking at current snapshots or the trends on how you got here, to applying machine learning algorithms on top of that to predict what's going to be in the future. So you may have a good supplier today, but because of some things that have happened, 6 months from now, the math may show that it's actually trending in the other way, and you might want to second guess, sourcing with them on this new program. So I think you still got to get the basics done. You've got you've got some really cool technologies between IoT devices and with the new analytic tools that are coming out that have come so far. I mean, I was responsible for BI when I was at the ERP company, and it's amazing to see how that technology has changed in just the last 5 years.
But what is BI?
Business intelligence. Okay. Data warehousing.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. One of the new things in supply chain now, at least conceptually, that we talk about is sustainability, Bo. And that means not only, how you as an organization are managing conflict minerals and what you're doing to the environment, but it's also making sure your suppliers are doing the same responsibilities. So are you guys doing anything around supplier compliance, or not compliance, but helping them be better companies? Or
yeah, we have a supplier management system that customers use to go out and create different, we call them supplier scorecards. And they may have them around a number of things. It could be insurance, it could be financial, it could be diversity, corporate responsibility, it could be conflict minerals, it could be anything that they build. And so it's not unusual for our customers to track through that tool over 400 data points to then pull all that information back together to create a scorecard to say this supplier is 79 out of 100, and how do they rank to other suppliers? And so you've got to have a way to collect that information, and you've got to have a way to keep it up to date. And again, if you think about a company with 400 data points and 5,000 suppliers, I mean you're talking about a vast amount of data that's got to be updated. You can't put teams of people. You need technology to help manage and maintain that.
So Chris and Will, y'all get ready. I like that last question you had, Chris, about defining the acronyms. We love our acronyms in supply chain, and we have a lot of our some listeners that are students, right? We get a lot of feedback from folks that are currently in undergraduate programs, and I'm going to put you on the spot with two other acronyms that Bo shared during the interview here. But first, let's make sure our listeners can follow up and learn more about LiveSource. Where's the best place that folks can do that, Bo?
Well, you can go to our website at www.livesource.com. You can also find me on my LinkedIn profile, as well as another way to contact me.
Outstanding. Bo Hagler, CEO at LiveSource. Congratulations on really impressive career, and congratulations on the growth that you're having at LiveSource. We look forward to having you back on and putting our finger back on the pulse of the organization.
Good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, have a great year. It's hard to believe we're at mid-November 2019, but I hope you all have a strong finish to the year.
Thank you.
Okay, so Chris and Will, we love our acronyms in supply chain, right? A couple others that I picked up on just because we're used to hearing them, right? For one was BOM. So for our listeners that may be figuring out what BOM stands for, I know it's in the APICS body of knowledge, the BOK. Chris, how would you define that?
Something that's very dangerous and explodes. So keep it away from your supply chains.
That is not it.
That's not it.
The bill of materials. You talked a lot about the changes that take place and the thousands of changes. Chris, for the layperson, how would you describe what that is?
It's just basically the parent-child relationship of a finished good or a parent item and the subcomponents that go into it.
So as the engineering designs change, the BOMs can change very regularly as well. You were speaking to that earlier, Bo. Exactly. So if you're listening, BOM, bill of materials, and then the other one I picked up on, it was ASN. Any want to take
that one's familiar.
That's
the advanced shipping notice, right?
Okay.
I'd call that an email. Hey, we sent it. It's on its way.
Yes. Well, we move so fast, and the neat thing, whether it's APICS or whether it's other bodies of knowledge that help teams speak the same language in supply chain, that enables us to move faster. And in this global business environment, things are changing minute by minute. Yeah. So that kind of speaks to the value of education and speaks to the value of why you look at some of these supply chain certification programs, right? So,
and on that, Scott, just for any certification students, so if I can drop a few more in there that he mentioned, either directly or indirectly, he talked about the upstream and downstream supply chain. So any student of APICS should fully understand what that represents. I'm not going to tell you what it is today, but he did reference it. Strategic sourcing is another key concept that we talk about in the CSCP modules. Obviously, the BI, conflict minerals. You should understand what conflict minerals are. He didn't say this, but he was talking about total productive maintenance. So when you start applying IoT to tooling and using that data to predict when maintenance needs to be done, we call that total productive maintenance. And then he talked about capacity management. But he's the first person to ever say it. I study it. I know what it is. Demonstrated capacity. So I was impressed that he dropped that in there as well.
One other thing, I picked up APQP, which I have not heard since my time in metal stamping. Advanced Product Quality Planning, right? Which is kind of that framework of all things procedures and techniques to make sure that the right parts and everything's taking place from a total quality standpoint, especially in automotive. APQP. I hadn't said that, I don't think, about 7 years.
What about what was the PPE or the
PPAP?
PPAP, yeah, I have no
Production
idea.
Part Approval Process.
He's told me 3 times, I still don't know what it is.
Which is a subpart of APQP.
Okay, all right. ABC.
That's right.
I think.
Well, what a great thanks so much, Bo, for sharing more about not only LiveSource, but about some of your insights from across industry and what's taking place in the supply chain space. So let's wrap up today in this episode on some of the upcoming events that we're going to be at together oftentimes. So we just got back a few weeks ago from Austin, had a wonderful time at EFT's Logistics CIO Forum. Many of you may know, if you've heard any of our previous podcasts, that EFT is now part of the Reuters organization. So they're going to be growing quite a bit in the months ahead. Our next event is going to be at CSCMP Atlanta's Roundtable lunch event in January 2020. where they're bringing someone in from NASTRAC to talk about some of the regulations and what it means for transportation companies. That is an open event, and you can learn more at atlantacscmp.org. And then in February, we're taking y'all ready for Vegas?
Yeah, man.
Yeah?
We're going to Vegas?
We are. February 2020, we're going to be joining the Reverse Logistics Association at their conference and Expo.
All right.
That's going to be, we talk about this a lot, but reverse logistics, especially in this e-commerce age, is a incredibly relevant aspect of end-to-end supply chain. So, and the RLA is working hard. Tony Schroeder and the whole team over there to help best practices proliferate out globally. So, global organization. And their yearly big conference expo is going to be out in Vegas in February. RLA.org for more information.
Reverse logistics probably never more prevalent than right now.
I'm with you. Yeah, and what I have uncovered or learned as we learned from that group is just how many companies are really they're still trying to feel their way out.
Of course.
When it comes to returns and reverse logistics and sustainability and the circular economy for that matter.
Yeah.
So it's been fascinating to be a part of that. We partner with the RLA on a monthly podcast series. Yeah, Tony's the man. Okay, then we're coming back to Atlanta. What's taking place? Any guesses in March 2020? What's taking place here in Atlanta?
Spring break.
Awards of some note, of some import.
So the 2020 Atlanta Supply Chain Awards are back for year 2. Really working with this team here. Had an outstanding year 1 event which took place in March 2019. We sold out. We recognize about 15 different companies that were driving excellence across different aspects of the end-to-end supply chain. We're back for year 2, March 10th, 2020. Nominations are open.
Yeah.
Registrations are open. Woo-hoo. And sponsorships are open.
Yeah, baby.
And we've added some new categories, including, Bo, you'll appreciate this one, the Supply Chain Startup of the Year. So our listeners can learn more at AtlantaSupplyChainAwards.com. Early nominations have included organizations Fast Fetch and Gray Orange, which I think are making a bunch of robots here.
The robots.
Now we're fortunate to be hosted by Modex. So Modex is one of the largest supply chain trade shows in the country. Expecting how many people will? Take a guess to Modex.
15,000.
Add 20.
35,000.
Yes. Unbelievable. All coming right here in Atlanta, the supply chain city, at the Georgia Ward Congress Center. And in day 2 of Modex, they're hosting our Atlanta Supply Chain Awards. So going bigger, going better. Christian Fisher, President and CEO of Georgia Pacific, is our keynote. Shan Cooper, who is legendary in many ways. I mean, she led the Lockheed plant in Marietta. She was Chief Transformation Officer at West Rock, and now she's our MC for the awards show. So really excited about year 2. One last note about that event. Modex is free to attend.
Free.
I mean, networking, best practice sharing, market intel, you name it, modexshow.com to learn more.
Take MARTA, and the whole event can cost you $5.
That's right.
Yeah.
You get a hot dog and a Coke.
You got to buy lunch, of course, but it's food trucks, so no big deal.
That's right. modexshow.com. Looking forward to that. Okay, big thanks again to our featured guest here today, Bo Hagler, CEO at LiveSource. Big thanks to my co-hosts, Chris Barnes and Will Haraway.
Yes, sir.
Great to have y'all back in the studio
Pleasure.
here. And to our audience, be sure to check out other upcoming events, replays of our interviews, other resources at supplychainnowradio.com. You can find us on Apple Podcast, SoundCloud, all the leading sites where podcasts can be found. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. On behalf of our entire team here, Scott Luton wishing you a wonderful week ahead, and we will see you next time on Supply Chain Now Radio. Thanks, everybody.